She smiled and shut me into the freezer to steal my $99 million. You think I'm being dramatic? I wish I were. I wish I could tell you this is just a story. But this is my life, and it starts with a woman I welcomed into my family with open hands and warm meals. She was my son's wife. She called me Mom. She kissed my cheek. She cut me out of photos. My name is Helen, and I'm 65 years old. The money didn't come from luck. It came from 40 years of hard work and ice-cold rooms. My late husband, George, started a refrigeration company in our garage when we were too young and too stubborn to know the odds. We had one truck and two broken fans. We fixed grocery store coolers at night and restaurant freezers before dawn. I took calls with a baby on my hip and grease on my wedding ring. We built that business with our hands. We built it together. After George died, I kept it alive long enough to sell it the right way. I took meetings I didn't understand and learned to understand them. I learned to say no and not yet. When the sale finally happened, the number in my bank app made me sit down on the kitchen floor. After taxes and lawyers, it was $99 million. I put that money into trusts and foundations and into things I could touch, trees planted in my husband's name, scholarships for girls who fix things with wrenches, roofs for shelters that keep women safe. I kept enough to be comfortable. I thought that was the end of the hard part. It wasn't. My son, Daniel, had married Ivy 2 years before the sale. Ivy was the kind of woman who made other women stop and stare, not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because you could feel the heat of her wanting when she walked into a room. She wanted to be the type of person waiters remember. She wanted to be the person who gets called ma'am with respect. She wanted more, and I don't blame anyone for wanting more. But with Ivy, wanting was hunger. It swallowed the things in its way. I tried to love her anyway. I meant it when I set an extra plate and folded her napkin and tapped her hand when she told me she had no one to ask about recipes. I meant it when I took the late-night call after their first big fight and told her, gently, that two people who loved each other could learn. I meant it when I held her first baby, my granddaughter, Nora, and whispered, "Welcome to a world that is going to love you." Do you know when I started to feel the chill? It was the week after the sale. We were at dinner, and Ivy asked me, sweet as honey, if I needed help organizing my accounts. She said she had spreadsheets, that she loved numbers, that it calmed her to see everything in order. She said it like a gift. I laughed and told her I had a woman named Ruth at the bank who loved numbers even more. It makes me nervous, you being alone with so much, Ivy said, sipping her wine. You should appoint someone you trust. Just in case. Just in case what? I wanted to ask. Just in case I die? Just in case you get what you want? I let that one slide. But then it was little things. She suggested I put her name on a few small accounts, for convenience. She pressed me to talk about the will. She wanted to know, what happens when? That's the phrase she used. What happens when? It was a strange phrase to hear from a 28-year-old woman with a baby and a smile that showed all her teeth. She started to show up at my house in the daytime when Daniel was at work. She would bring me coffee and say we should go through papers, and then she would drift into my study, put her hands on my desk, and hum as if she was thinking of something pleasant. She would leave her perfume on my chair. She would put a pen back in the wrong place. I'm old enough to know when someone is trying to get comfortable in a room that isn't theirs. I wish I could say I told Daniel and he believed me. I told him, but he was in love. He told me Ivy was trying. He told me I should be generous. He told me she had a hard childhood, and that she sees security as safety. He told me what good men say when they are trying to honor both sides. He didn't see what I saw. He didn't feel how the temperature in a room changes when a person who wants what is yours decides you are in the way. Then there was the day of the freezer. I had kept one thing from our business days. A walk-in freezer in the big old barn behind my house. It wasn't plugged in most days, but I kept it for my memories and for my summers of making food for every family I knew. I used it to store berries and casseroles and pies for church dinners. It made me feel like the time when my life fit into containers with labels I wrote by hand. Ivy called that morning. Her voice was steady. Mom, she said, Daniel left his blue duffel at your place last night. He needs it for a trip. I'm coming by to pick it up. She had been over, it's true. They had brought the kids. We had eaten soup. Daniel had gone downstairs and put something near the freezer, I remembered. I told her I would meet her by the barn door. She pulled up wearing sunglasses big enough to hide a week of bad sleep. I hugged her. She hugged me back with one arm. The other arm held her phone like a weapon. We walked to the barn. The air smelled like summer dust and old wood. The duffel's near the freezer, I said. Careful of the step. I'll get it, she said, moving faster. You shouldn't carry that. She opened the freezer door and stepped inside to look for the bag. I stood in the doorway. She turned, lifted the duffel with a little grunt, and handed it to me. Heavy, she said, and laughed. Her laugh always came a half second after her smile, like she had to ask her face for permission first. Thank you, baby, I said, cradling the bag. I took one step back. That's when she put her hand flat on my shoulder and pushed. It was not gentle. It was not an accident. It was cold. The metal door swung. I stumbled. The duffel slipped. I had time to reach for the door, like in a dream where your arms move slow. Ivy's face loomed. For 1 second, it was not pretty. It was honest. It was hungry. Ivy? I said. The door closed. It wasn't dark inside. There was a dim emergency light in the corner, the kind that stays on even when the power is off. I stood still. I could hear my own blood in my ears. I could hear Ivy breathing on the other side. I heard the quiet click she made with her tongue when she was pleased. I heard her phone vibrate. It sounded like a rattlesnake. I know this voice coming out of me right now is calm. I am telling you this calm because being calm was what saved me. Panic would have used my air. Panic would have made me pound on the door and scream. Panic would have made me forget what George taught me when we built this thing, back when inspections mattered and men came with checklists and markers. He had insisted on every safety feature they could sell us. He said, we will never build a cold room you can't escape. He said, if you're going to keep things cold, keep people warm. It was his way of saying care more. He didn't always say things right, but his heart was in the right place. I leaned my head against the wall and counted to 10 because that is what I do when the oven smokes. When the phone rings at midnight, when love hurts. I let my heart beat slow. I let the anger inside me find a shelf and sit. Then I turned and felt along the inside of the door for what I knew had to be there. I won't tell you exactly what I found or how I opened it. I won't give the world a step-by-step. I will tell you that life leaves doors inside darkness. Sometimes you have to go quiet to find them. Sometimes you have to trust past you to take care of present you. George had taken care of me with that small thing all those years ago, and in that cold space, his big warm hands were with me. I felt something metal where metal shouldn't be. I used the strength you build from holding babies and carrying trays and lifting things heavier than people expect mothers to lift. The door gave. Not all the way. Enough. I squeezed through a space that made my bones feel like they had opinions. I left a piece of my favorite sweater on that door. I left a thin line of my skin. I stood in the barn, shaking. The world felt too bright. There was a red mark on my face from where I had pressed against the steel. On the dirt floor was the duffel. Inside was not clothes. Inside was a locked accordion folder with tabs, will, insurance, bank, passwords. She had printed everything she could have possibly printed from the binder I keep in my study. My stomach lurched. She had been in my house while I slept. She had been in my house while I laughed. A truck passed on the road and the sound snapped the spell. I could have walked straight into the house, called Daniel, and told him to come home. I could have called the police and said, help me please. But I stood there with the dust motes circling the air like slow snow, and I saw something very clear. I saw Ivy's face when the door closed. I saw the click of her tongue. She was ready to see me gone. She had planned this. She had thought it through. She was going to come back. She was going to take more than paper. When she came home, I was going to be waiting. First, I called Ruth at the bank. She knows my voice. Ruth, I said, it's Helen. I need your quiet attention and your loud loyalty. You have both, she said, and I felt the ground under my feet again. I told her what happened. There was a pause that sounded like a storm gathering. Then she said, we're moving everything to the lockbox trust we discussed. Today. The one that activates on harm. The one with the alternate trigger. Do it, I said. She asked for a code I keep in the back of an old cookbook. I gave it to her. I gave her power to pull money out of rooms and hide it where greed can't reach. I called my lawyer next. The same woman who sat with me when we sold the company and wiped her eyes with a napkin when we signed because she had watched us grow from one truck to many. I need a new will, I said, and not in a week. Today. It needs to say something very clear. She came in an hour. She has keys to my front door because she has earned them. She brought another attorney to witness and a paralegal with a bag full of forms. I told them what Ivy had done. They listened without interrupting. Then my lawyer took off her glasses and said, "We'll handle the paper. We need more than paper." She called a detective she trusts. He arrived with a face like a closed door and eyes that missed nothing. "Don't tell Daniel yet," the detective said, while he set a small device on my kitchen shelf. "Let him be as clean in this as he can be. If he knows, he may get used." He and his partner put small cameras in places where the dust had settled and the paint had chipped. He asked me what things Ivy touched when she came over. He asked me to hand him a teacup. He asked to see the barn. I took them out there. I showed them the freezer. He whistled low when he saw the mark on my face. His partner took photos. He wrote down the serial number stamped in metal from 30 years ago. "Could you sit quietly when she comes?" He asked me. "Could you let her talk? You know how you get people to talk." "I have fed people for 40 years, I said. "You put something warm in their hands. They will tell you who they are." The day stretched thin. I drank water. I wiped my face with a cold cloth. I changed my sweater. I did not look in the mirror. I took a casserole from the freezer, the other freezer, the one in the kitchen that holds proper food and not ghosts, and put it in the oven. It felt like an act of war to make dinner. It felt like a prayer Ruth called to say the trust was complete. If anything happened to me, the money would go to a foundation that bore my mother's name. It would pay for safe housing for women and education for girls who fix things. If I lived, I still had all I needed. The new will named Daniel and the grandchildren, not Ivy. It set aside a fund for Nora and her little brother, Jacob, that no one could touch until they were kind to the world. There was a letter attached to the will that Ivy would never see, because I don't write my heart in places my enemies can read. The detective set his team in unmarked cars on the road. He asked me if I had a neighbor I could trust to sit with me and not speak. I called Rosalie, who lives next door and knows every birth and death on this street by the crease of the sidewalk. She walked in with a lipstick she only wears for weddings and funerals. She put it on and sat at my counter and said, "We are going to see the end of something today." She took my hands and squeezed them. 5 hours isn't long in the sweep of a life. But you feel every grain of every minute when you are waiting for someone who tried to take your breath to walk through your door. At 5:30, a car slid into my driveway. I saw the shape of her head through the glass. I felt my mouth go dry. I stood up. Rosalie stood behind me, quiet as a curtain. Ivy didn't knock. She never knocked anymore. She walked in and sang a little, the way people do when they want everything to seem normal. "Mom," she called. "I came to check on you. I didn't see you in the barn, and I got worried." I was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea and a slice of lemon cake sitting between them. I lifted my chin and smiled. "Sit," I said. "Have some cake." She stopped in the doorway like someone had moved the furniture. Then she laughed. She laughed too hard. She put her purse down and smoothed her hair and sat. I poured the tea. Her hands shook. She hid them in her lap. She took her sunglasses off slowly and put them on the table, as if they might be a shield. "I was so worried," she said. She looked at my face, at the thin scrape by my temple. Her eyes flicked to the barn through the window and back to me. "I went to the barn to get the duffel, and I thought I heard something. I thought maybe you had fallen. I called and you didn't answer. I was so scared." She had rehearsed this. You could hear the rhythm of a thing practiced in a mirror. You could hear the pat of the words as they landed on the table like small coins. "Ivy," I said, and I put my finger on the place where the wood had a little dent, the place Nora bangs her spoon when she eats. "You didn't call anyone." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "You didn't call anyone," I repeated. "And you didn't tell anyone. You left me in that place and you took the duffel with my papers and you drove away." Mom, what? Why would I?" "There are cameras now," I said, and my voice was so soft the steam from the tea made it look like a prayer. "You and I are not the only people in this room. They heard you in the barn. They saw you close the door. They saw you look at your reflection on the steel and fix your hair." Her mouth opened and closed. She glanced to the corner shelf where the detective put something that looked like a small plant. She blinked again and her face changed, but not into something ugly. It changed into something tired. It changed into a face that had reached the end of pretending. She took a breath that was almost a sigh. "Do you love my son?" I asked. She looked at her hands. She took one of the lemon slices and put it in her tea. She watched it float like a small sun in a dark sky. Then she said, "Yes. I do. I love what he could give me, and I loved him because he was the first man who never left when I told him the truth. He stayed. He made the world quiet. But the quiet doesn't pay for things. My heart cracked in a strange place that wasn't exactly the place you'd think. It cracked for the little girl inside her who learned that love must be held ransom. It did not excuse her. Not one breath of it excused her. But it made me know that I was staring at hunger that had grown up into a person. "Tell me what you plan to do," I said. And I gently pushed the cake closer. She looked at me like I had delivered a verdict she didn't expect. And then she told me, "I found your binder," she said, voice barely louder than the air. "I made copies of everything. I went to the bank when you were at your church group and pretended to be you, and they sent me away, but I learned the questions they ask. I looked at the list and I learned the answers. I found your old will. You had everything for Daniel and the babies. You didn't include me in your decisions. You were going to make me beg for them. I told myself it wasn't fair. I told myself I am the one taking care of your grandchildren. I am the one making sure their shoes fit and their medicine is given on time and their costumes get sewn while your son stays late to impress his boss." Her voice took on a rhythm and she didn't notice. It sounded like confession. It sounded like a person telling herself the stories she used to survive. "I told myself I was owed," she said. "I told myself you wouldn't suffer. It would be easy. It would be like a nap." Her jaw shook. "I don't know what you want me to say that makes it better. I did what I did. I did it because I wanted to be safe for the first time in my life." "And so you chose to end mine," I said. "So you could be safe." A small sound came from the pantry. That was the sound of grief walking into a room. Daniel stepped into the kitchen. The detective stood behind him like a shadow. Rosalie stayed in her chair with her lipstick perfect and her hands folded like she was in church. Daniel looked older than the last time I had seen him. He looked so young. His eyes were the eyes he had when he broke his arm at 7 and said he was fine while he bit his lip hard enough to bleed. He didn't look at me first. He looked at Ivy. He looked at the tea. He looked at the lemon slice in her cup. He stood very still. "Ivy," he said, and the sound of her name in his mouth was a soft thing. "Why?" She looked up at him then, and something bright and terrible passed between them. It was not hate. It was the end of a story they had told themselves. "Because I didn't know any other way," she whispered. "Because when I dream of the future, the only thing that makes the fear stop is a door I can close behind me with all the money we need inside." Daniel closed his eyes. He nodded once, like a man tallying a debt and finding the numbers final. The detective stepped forward. "Mrs. Hart," he said to Ivy, "we're going to ask you to come with us. You have the right to remain silent. You may want to use it." Ivy looked at me. She opened her mouth like she was about to say my name. Then she closed it. She put her sunglasses back on even though the sun was running away. She stood up and placed her wrists, without being asked, in front of herself like a child playing a game. The detective did his job. It was quiet. It was merciful. He didn't make a show. She looked at Daniel one last time. "I'm sorry," she said, and even if the apology was only 40% real, that 40% was a human-sized truth. She let them walk her to the door. When the door closed, Daniel put both hands on the back of a chair and didn't move. He didn't cry right away. He didn't speak. He breathed as I poured him tea. He didn't drink it. He put his head in his hands. He made a sound that mothers know, the sound of a heart folding in on itself. I put my hand on his back and rubbed small circles like I did when he was a colicky baby, and the only thing to do was to stay out. He said, Did she really?" "She did," I said. "But we are not going to drown in that sentence. We are going to float on the truth that she did not finish what she started." He nodded. He tried to speak again and couldn't. So we sat. Rosalie poured more tea for everyone because that is what she knows to do when the world is at the edge of breaking. The detective came back after the car had turned the corner. He told us there would be interviews and statements in court. He told us it would be slow. He told us it would be fair if we showed up and told the truth every time. I told him I would. I told him, too, that I wanted a recorded record of the barn. He smiled with one side of his mouth. "You really do fix things," he said. "Someone has to," I said. That night, after the house was finally quiet and the casserole had been eaten by people who didn't taste it, I walked out to the barn alone. The air had cooled. The fields held a blue kind of light. I stood in front of the freezer and placed my hand where my face had pressed earlier and left a mark. I touched the metal and I thanked my husband, out loud, for being the kind of man who built an exit where most men trust a lock. I could have sold that freezer with the company. I could have taken it to the dump years ago. I could have let go of that cold room. I didn't. Some part of me wanted to keep a piece of what made us strong. Some part of me knew I would need reminding. In the weeks that followed, the world stretched strange. There were court appearances. There was paperwork. There were questions. The story found the people it always finds: neighbors who know someone at the courthouse, women at church who recognize a face on the news without knowing what to do with the knowledge, men at the hardware store who talk to each other in low voices and shake their heads. Daniel moved into my guest room. He tucked Jacob into a little bed under the window and taped stars to the ceiling. Nora slept in the room that used to be Daniel's, surrounded by trophies and a faded poster of a basketball player she called the old tall man. We made breakfasts and did school drop-offs and answered hard questions in simple sentences. When Nora asked where her mommy was, I told her. She is somewhere where people will help her tell the truth. When she asked why, I told her. Because sometimes grown-ups need help the way children do. When I say revenge, I do not mean blood. I do not mean fire. I do not mean screaming in parking lots and throwing plates. I mean the kind of justice that puts broken pieces where they go and locks the door to rooms you shouldn't live in. I mean the kind of revenge that looks like a stack of folders with names of girls who will go to school because I did not die that day. I mean the kind that looks like a letter to my granddaughter that says, "You will never be made to beg for love." I took that 99 million and made it louder. I created the Eleanor Foundation with my mother's name, and I wrote into its bones that it would outlive me. I brought women onto the board who do not owe me. Yes. I gave them power and budget and a mandate: teach women to read the fine print. Teach them to keep a copy of the keys. Teach them that the emergency exit exists. We funded legal help for women whose husbands drain their accounts in the night. We funded night classes in small towns where women work all day and still sit under bright lights to learn what a living will is. We put warm coats in the hands of people who have been cold too long. My revenge was this: I took what Ivy reached for and made it unstealable. The day of the sentencing came with rain. The courthouse smelled like old paper and fear. Ivy sat with her lawyer. Her hair was pulled back. She did not look at me. She did not look at Daniel. She looked at her hands, which were small and strong. The hands of a mother who had buttoned small coats and cut small sandwiches and turned a key on a door that should never have been closed. The judge spoke, and the words were dry and important. Attempted this. Conspiracy that. Enhancement here. He said years and numbers and conditions. He looked at Ivy and asked if she wanted to speak. I don't have a defense, she said, and her voice carried in that room in a way that made people stop chewing their gum and put their pens down. I have a reason. It is not a good one. She turned to me then, finally, and our eyes met. It was not triumph that moved through me. It was the warm ache of reality. It was the knowledge that sometimes the people who hurt you are not monsters. They are tired and cruel and selfish and broken, and they choose to hurt you anyway. I am sorry, Ivy said, for what I did to you and for what I did to your son and for what my children will have to carry. I cannot ask you for forgiveness. I can only say the truth. The judge sentenced her. The sound of the gavel was like a lid on a pot. It rattled and then settled. People stood. People sat. We went home, that night, after Nora and Jacob were asleep in the house had that hum houses have when children are inside them. Daniel and I sat at the kitchen table. He picked at the wood in the same place where my finger had been the day Ivy sat there. He pressed each splinter down with his thumb and then let it go. Do you hate her? He asked me. No, I said. I don't waste my hate. I return what belongs to other people. The hate belongs to the thing that taught her that safety comes from taking someone else's breath away. I hate that. I don't hate her. But I will never let her near my door again. He nodded. He looked at me with tears held tight in his lashes like boys learn to do. How do we teach our children to be better than this? By telling them the stories, I said. By letting them see that love is not silence. By showing them that when someone tries to lock you away, you call it by its name. By letting them watch you be brave in the kitchen with a cup of tea. By teaching them emergency exits exist. By never making them choose between telling the truth and being loved. He laughed at that last one, a small sound that felt like a hand closing around mine. Mom, he said, can you make pancakes tomorrow? Yes, I said. With extra blueberries. People expect a big ending. They expect a firework or a speech. That is not how most justice feels. It feels like a freezer door in a barn that will never close the same way again. It feels like a teacup with a crack you can't see holding hot water anyway. It feels like lemon cake on a plate in a kitchen where the air is clear. It feels like a woman touching the place where her face got scraped and saying, I am still here. And because I know some of you will write to me and ask, I will tell you a last thing I learned: when someone tries to make you small, breathe slow. Count to 10. The world will try to make you panic. Calm is not the same as quiet. Calm is choosing your door. Weeks after the courthouse, I went into the barn with Nora. She likes to run around and make echoes. She stood in front of the freezer and tried to open it with her small hands. Is it locked? She asked, frowning. It doesn't lock the way it used to, I said, and I smiled so she could hear it in my voice. I put my palm flat on the door, and together we pulled. It opened, just enough to let the warmth of the day in. What's in there? She asked. Old things that fed us, I said. And a lesson. She nodded like that made sense. Children know things we forget. She ran out into the sun, and I watched her, and the air felt like the kind of air you want to live inside. I closed the barn slowly. I locked it. I turned and walked toward my kitchen, where the kettle would sing and hands would reach for cups and life would go on. I am telling you this because sometimes you need to hear an ending that is not an ending. Sometimes you need to sit with another woman and drink tea and feel the truth settle like sugar at the bottom of a cup. Sometimes you need to hear someone say, she tried to freeze me out of my own life. When she came home, I was waiting. Waiting with a plan. Waiting with the law. Waiting with my breath steady and my heart still. If you are out there with a person who smiles while they take things that are yours, know this: you are not crazy. You are not weak. Your story is not over. There is a door. It might be hard to find. It might scrape your skin when you push through. But it is there, and when they come home, you can wait for them on the other side, warm, ready, and determined that the only thing frozen in your life will be the pies you save for Sundays, the berries you thaw for pancakes, and the silence you refuse to keep. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story.